until 12:30 p.m. Eastern, when they'll recess for weekly party lunches. When members return, they could begin debate on a bill dealing with surface transportation programs. Live coverage of all the Senate activity here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Gracious God, from whom comes every good and perfect gift, we turn our hearts to you, our refuge and strength. Lord, lead our senators today in the ways of peace. Plant peace in their hearts, freeing them from selfishness and enmity, and strengthening them with generosity and kindness. Bring peace to our world, so the weapons of destruction will become tools of construction, and people will experience a shared destiny of hope and prosperity. In a special way, bless the members of our armed forces and their families. Sustain them with your everlasting arms. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., February 7, 2012. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, present pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 12:30 today. Republicans will control the first 30 minutes, majority of the final 30 minutes. The Senate will recess from 12:30 until 2:15 p.m. for our weekly caucus meetings. We hope to begin consideration of a number of matters, including the service transportation bill, during today's session. In this country, owning a home, Mr. President, in this country, owning a home means more than a roof over your head. It's the centerpiece of the American dream. But for many responsible Americans, the dream of home ownership has become a nightmare. When Wall Street greed collapsed the economy in 2008, the housing market also collapsed. That meant free-falling home prices and a staggering number of foreclosures. No state in the union was hit harder than Nevada, but California was hit extremely hard, Michigan, Arizona, Florida. But for 5 consecutive years, Nevada has led the nation in foreclosures. The foreclosure rate in Nevada is 400% the national average. Behind those statistics are people, whether it's Nevada, Arizona, Florida, Michigan, or any place else in the country. The statistics are people, families that bought homes where they could raise their families and enjoy life. Many Nevadans, like other Americans who worked hard, saved money, and shopped responsibly, are now so far underwater they can't see a way out. So who's responsible? There's plenty of blame to go around. Brokers sold loans that could never be repaid. Buyers bought houses they couldn't afford. Banks bundled bad loans to sell to investors. But regardless of who's at fault, millions of homeowners who did everything right are still on the hook from a financial crisis they didn't cause. Many of them have never missed a payment. Unlike some Republicans, I don't believe the answer is to throw up our hands and do nothing. Homeowners who have watched their equity evaporate don't have time to sit and wait for the market to reach rock bottom, as one Republican presidential candidate suggested. Congress and President Obama have taken action to ease this crisis. Not everything we've done to ease the crisis has worked, but we need to continue programs that are working and fix ones that aren't. I support the President's efforts to reduce the hurdles to financing, refinancing for sure. Nearly 15 million Americans could benefit from refinancing their loans at today's historically low prices. I should say low interest rates, Mr. President. We must keep those who have lost their jobs from losing their homes as well. This proposal will help them reduce their monthly payments and save thousands of dollars every year. And for families who owe more than their house is worth, it will help them rebuild the equity they lost because of the collapse in the housing market. Red tape should no longer be responsible for refinancing their loans and restoring their futures. Red tape, Mr. President, I repeat, should no longer keep responsible homeowners from refinancing their loans and restoring their futures. There are some who advocate a do-nothing policy. They say there's nothing we can do to help. They couldn't be more wrong. Here's just one example. My Nevada offices have hosted several foreclosure workshops. More than 2,000 people have taken the opportunity to sit down face-to-face with their lenders, often for the first time. Several thousand more have gotten help from caseworkers in my office. Caseworkers and owners have worked together, literally, to save homes from the auction block. I'm hosting another workshop in Las Vegas this Saturday. We can't help everyone, but we must do more to help those we can. It's time for more federal action. It's time to give homeowners in every state the tools they need to hold on to their homes and hold on to the American dream.
The roll.
Mr. Cochran.
Mr. President.
Republican leader.
I suggest that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I want to make a couple of observations this morning about the bipartisan support that exists for extending the payroll tax holiday. I'll start with the obvious. Republicans strongly support extending this tax cut for the rest of the year. Americans have suffered long enough as a result of this president's economic policies. They don't need to suffer more because of his failure to turn the economy around 3 years into his administration. But the fact of the matter is, any solution requires both sides to engage in good faith negotiations. When my friend, the Majority Leader of the Senate, comes to the floor and says that Republicans in Congress are only willing to extend this tax cut if they're allowed to poison Americans' drinking water, then I think it's pretty safe to say that it's time for fewer partisan attacks and more efforts to finish the job. When a tax hike that has been rejected repeatedly by members of both parties over the past year is the opening bid in a negotiation, I think it's safe to say that Democrats are more interested in scoring political points than in scoring a tax cut that millions of middle-class Americans are counting on. When the Majority Leader of the Senate suddenly announces that he's working on a proposal of his own to extend this tax cut, even as a conference committee is in the midst of negotiating a bipartisan solution that everybody can support, I think it's pretty obvious where the problem lies. It's with a Democratic majority and a president who we thought were elected to lead. I think most Americans would expect that at a moment like this, when a solution to a pressing problem is sought, that the majority party bears the responsibility to find it. It's worth noting that in the House, the majority party did its work and passed a one-year extension. Yet all we get from the Democratic majority in the Senate are exaggerated claims, ad hominem attacks, and false accusations aimed at delaying a solution rather than achieving one. And so I would remind my friend the Majority Leader that the particular piece of legislation he railed against yesterday as an effort to poison people has broad bipartisan support, including 12 Democratic co-sponsors here in the Senate, and rightly so in the middle of a jobs crisis. We should seize every opportunity we have to help job creators at a time when more than 13 million Americans are looking for work and can't find it. The only thing controversial about this proposal is the idea of opposing it. I would also remind the Majority Leader that the federal pay freeze received more than 300 votes in the House, and that he himself already agreed to spending cuts during negotiations this past fall that would cover the cost of extending this payroll tax cut for the remainder of the year. So let's allow the conferees to finish their work, get this payroll tax cut extended for the rest of the year. That's what Republicans want. That's what the President says he wants. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to get this done. The Democratic majority in the Senate should be leading that effort, not rooting for its failure. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 12:30 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided, and the Republicans controlling the first 30 minutes and the majority controlling the next 30 minutes. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate's in a period of morning business until 12:30, so it'll be general speeches until then. At 12:30, they'll recess for their weekly party lunches. Senators will return at 2:15, and they could begin debate on a bill dealing with surface transportation programs. Of course, you can see the Senate here always on C-SPAN 2. The House starts legislative business at noon Eastern today, and they'll continue debating a bill creating a commission to find federal non-military property that can be liquidated to save taxpayer money. Also, more work on a measure streamlining the federal budget process with general debate and amendments. Voting is expected to wrap up by 6 p.m. Eastern. See the House on C-SPAN. Well, the road to the White House continues tonight with primaries and caucuses in Colorado, Minnesota, Maine, and the Missouri primary. Results from these caucuses and primaries are non-binding. And we get more now from a reporter covering the presidential race.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Libby.
Wanted to get your take on these caucuses and the primary. How much impact do they actually have?
They'll have a significant impact. Technically, 0 delegates are at stake today, so it's not really about the delegates, but what it is about is momentum. And today is a critical day for Rick Santorum. It's the most important day for him since the Iowa caucuses, and he's either going to emerge tonight as the superior alternative to Mitt Romney compared to Newt Gingrich, or his campaign is essentially going to be over. He's competing hard in Missouri, where Newt Gingrich isn't on the ballot, and Mitt Romney has not invested time. And if he can't win in Missouri, then he's in real trouble. But if he does win in Missouri, then he's going to be taken very seriously. Likewise, in Minnesota, he's considered the front runner going into the caucuses. If he can win here, conservatives will, especially at the establishment and elite level, will give him a real second look. If he can't win here, his campaign's over. So the stakes couldn't be higher for Rick Santorum.
Politico and other news outlets are reporting that Mitt Romney is directing some of his attacks at Rick Santorum now. He's going at both flanks. He's got to be hitting Newt Gingrich, President Obama, but also now Rick Santorum. So how is this playing out? How is the Santorum presence affecting the other candidates?
Well, Libby, the Romney folks are a little nervous that for weeks they've let Santorum continue to attack them and they've ignored him. So in their internal polling and in public polls, Santorum has the highest favorability in the race. People really like Santorum because they haven't heard all the attacks and the knocks on him. And so yesterday you saw a flurry of back and forth tit-for-tat press releases between the Romney campaign and the Santorum campaign as each kind of escalated the fight. Meanwhile, because Newt Gingrich is going to have a really bad night tonight, he's expected to do quite poorly in all 3 of the states with contests. He was trying to downplay expectations. And in fact, while these 3 states are voting today, he jets off to Ohio. And so he tried to remove himself from this back and forth between Santorum and Romney to try and let them duke it out and live to fight another day. So that's definitely different than we've seen the last couple of weeks, where it has very much been a Romney-Gingrich race.
Now, if Rick Santorum manages to pull some votes away from Mitt Romney. Does it ultimately help Newt Gingrich? There was a story where Newt Gingrich was quoted as saying, hey, any vote against Mitt Romney is sort of good for all of us. Is that the case, or are Santorum and Gingrich still competing for votes together?
They're definitely competing for votes together. They're different. There's sort of this conventional sense that if Santorum was out of the race, those votes would go to Gingrich, and that's not true if you actually drill into the polling. And anecdotally, if you go to Santorum events, a lot of Santorum supporters' second choice is Romney because they're family values folks, evangelicals who are very uncomfortable with Newt Gingrich, and so they appeal to different bases. What's likely to happen is, say Santorum does really well tonight, a lot of conservatives are going to say, hey, he is the better conservative alternative to Romney, so let's get behind Santorum. You've already seen that in the last couple of days. And then what could happen, and this is what the Romney people are hoping for, is that the conservatives who want to stop Romney will continue to be divided more evenly between Santorum and Gingrich. And we're heading into this February lull where we're going to have weeks after Saturday's caucuses in Maine without a contest, nothing until the 28th in Michigan and Arizona. And so conservatives will continue to be divided. They won't be able to coalesce behind one person to stop Romney, and that would allow Romney to coast on Super Tuesday and really accumulate a lot of the delegates he'll need to get the nomination. So the Romney folks would love for conservatives to continue to be divided, and they don't want people to get behind either Gingrich or Santorum. They kind of want to keep both of them alive for a little longer.
Now, James Homan, you started off by saying that there's not actually a lot of impact in what happens today. Explain that for us.
Well, technically these are non-binding caucuses. In Missouri there's a primary, but it's a popularity contest because it doesn't award any of the delegates to the Republican National Convention, which is where the nominee actually gets chosen. That happens through a caucus process that comes later. So there's no binding impact on the delegates in Missouri. And then in Colorado and Minnesota, no matter what happens in the caucuses, it's essentially a popularity contest. It's a straw poll. The people who actually decide how they're going to vote as delegates are elected in state conventions that don't come for several months. And those people aren't legally or bound by any rules to vote for whoever wins the caucus in the state. So Romney could, in fact, in 2008, Romney handily won the Minnesota caucuses. Here, I'm in Minnesota reporting on the ground today. He won with 50%, but he ended up getting no delegates because he wasn't able to work through the process effectively. Ron Paul got 15% in Minnesota 4 years ago, but he was actually able to get more delegates out of here than almost any other state because his people worked the convention process quite effectively. So the vote itself doesn't actually have an impact on the number of delegates that get awarded. But as we've been discussing, what's key is momentum. Coming out of tonight, Rick Santorum will either look like he's the guy to beat Romney or he's not.
James Homan, national political reporter with Politico. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Libby.
And a reminder that we will have results and victory and concession speeches tonight from our website, cspan.org/campaign2012. While the Senate remains in this quorum call, we'll join a discussion now from earlier today about House and Senate approval of long-term funding for the Federal Aviation Administration from today's Washington Journal.
John Mica, Republican of Florida, where he represents the 7th District. He's the chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Good morning.
Hey, good to be with you. Bright day, a little chilly in Washington.
That's okay.
I heard some of your preliminary talk about earmarks, and we want to talk about infrastructure this morning, but a lot of exciting territory to cover this morning.
Well, let's just react to that for a moment. The Washington Post has a front page story that we were talking about, looking at the earmarks that members direct home and making some correlations between where money is sent home and how members have investments. They own property, and tomorrow the Washington Post is going to be looking at how members of Congress might be helping out family members through bringing home that money to the local region. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, I think... well, someone said that earmarks a little bit like pornography. You know what it is when you see it. But It's, you know, I think legislative earmarks, we've seen some bad ones, and there can also be some good ones. And the alternative, everything Congress does is earmarking, whether we just put one line, you know, we're going to put one line of taxpayer dollars dedicated to billions to whatever. And then you have the alternative of turning that money over to the bureaucrats. And I mean, you can't see out here, but there are dozens of buildings filled with bureaucrats who have never been in these congressional districts that make decisions. And they can make bad decisions, too. So I think the best thing is transparency in the process. I tried, when I became ranking member, to clean up the process. I put all the Republican earmarks online. We had a vetting process. They had to be in on time. You had to sign a disclosure, you know, a conflict disclosure. The nice part about what I'm doing, the FAA bill, now it's hard to believe, and the transportation bill that we marked up in committee last week, we don't have a single earmark. The FAA bill on its way to the president today, and the transportation bill we did in the House, we set an example with no earmarks, believe it or not.
Talk to us about the FAA reauthorization. It passed the Senate last night. It's something you've been working on.
Seems like part of my life, but well, the Democrats were unable to pass an FAA bill. I was the chair of the Aviation Subcommittee back in 2001. In 2003, we did a 4-year bill. That 4-year bill expired in 2007. Democrats took over in 2008, and for 4 years, even though they controlled huge majorities, they weren't able to pass a bill. When I took over as chair last year, I passed several extensions, and then I said, whoa, this has to stop. So I sent a rather distasteful extension over. The Democrats had done 17 extensions, and one of my, maybe the 20th extensions, I cut out all ticket subsidies, airline ticket subsidies, in excess of $1,000. Well, that raised havoc in the Senate. They didn't like it. And it caused a partial shutdown of the FAA, you may recall. But what it did is prompt some action, I believe, and that action was completed yesterday. The Senate didn't like, you know, what we were sending them. And we've got some long-term stability to what accounts for about 8 to 11% of our domestic commercial and business activity in the United States. So it's on its way. It's 5 years overdue, and it's very important that we have that stability in place.
You mentioned the debate, really the stalemate that happened over the summer. Congress went on recess in August without coming up with a plan for the FAA, and there was a lot of back and forth. You just now blame the Democrats, but
no, I didn't blame the Democrats, but I passed on a Wednesday. They could have finished it by Friday. They didn't like the cutting of the $1,000 plus subsidies. You know, one of the subsidies was $3,720 per airline ticket, and that's outrageous. So they waited 2 weeks to adopt my extension with the cuts in it. But there are two things I was going to do. Is one, move this legislation forward. You know, 4 years of not doing the people's business and going into the 5th year without policy in place, without a blueprint for what accounts for an important part of our economic activity is not you know, it's just not responsible. And we have millions of people out of job, hundreds of thousands in the aviation industry, and Congress is fiddling while their jobs are held hostage. So I did what I had to do, and that legislation is now on its way to the president. I'll do the same thing with the transportation bill if necessary. We need to get the people's business done, stop messing around, and move forward.
Secretary Ray LaHood went on the offensive back in August. He was livid and blamed you as well as other Republicans in the House for what he called...
I got it done.
Well, let me...
You know, he had complete control. They had the White House, complete control of the House of Representatives for 4 years. They did nothing. And this is 1 year later. I got it done. I'm pleased with what Republicans did. First thing we did is we kept spending in check. The other thing we did is we cut some of these outrageous subsidies and things of that sort. The other thing we did is next generation air traffic control, which is so important to safety and everything. That's moving forward.
We'll definitely talk about next gen in just a moment. Senator Rockefeller was critical at the time because of cuts to the Essential Air Service program and was also concerned about a multi-year extension from the House that would make it harder for airline and railroad workers to unionize. He said it was about politics. So how did you overcome that impasse?
Well, the House passed one version of changing what, well, the Obama administration had backed a new board in the National Mediation Board, which organizes for labor. They changed 70 years of labor law and said whoever shows up, a majority of whoever shows up, can force everyone to go into a union. The House voted to do away with that. We came up, and John Boehner, I give him great credit. He worked with the Senate leaders and others, and they came up with a compromise that said at least 50% of the members must sign a petition to go to a vote. Then they added some common sense reforms like audits of those elections, like public hearings when the NMB, the National Mediation Board, is doing hearings. So those are some good fundamental compromises that I think will enhance the whole process, both for labor and also for the American public as far as transparency in those elections. So it's a compromise, and I think it's a good one.
We heard a lot of comments on the Senate floor yesterday in support of this FAA reauthorization, but the chairman of the committee that deals with labor issues, Tom Harkin of Iowa, did have concerns about language in the bill on unions. Let's listen to what he had to say yesterday.
So, these few powerful airlines waged an unprecedented attack campaign to kill the rule. First, they found some friends in Congress and tried challenging the rule under the Congressional Review Act, a law that allows Congress to overturn a rule through a resolution of disapproval. They lost that fight here on the Senate floor. Next, they went to court to challenge the legality of the rulemaking. Well, they lost that fight in the district court, and then they appealed it to the Court of Appeals, and they lost there too. So, then they waged a last-ditch effort to kill the rule on this FAA bill, which has nothing to do with it. Again, this was not in the Senate bill. The House put it on. A totally unrelated provision dealing with the National Mediation Board that isn't even a part of the FAA and which isn't in the jurisdiction of the two relevant committees.
Senator Harkin of Iowa. Congressman Micah, what's your response to that?